Hey everyone, I'm Kristen Jensen, and I am the founder of Defend Young Minds, the author of the Good Pictures, Bad Pictures series of read aloud books, and the executive producer of Brain Defense, a digital safety curriculum. And today I am so happy to welcome Dr. Donald Hilton to talk with us today. He is a noted neurosurgeon. He has done a lot of work with academics and teaching. He's a published author and a noted scholar, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about the brain and how it's impacted by the things that we, consume, the things that we watch, the things that we do. So with that, thank you so much, Dr. Hilton, for being with us today. I know our Defend Young Minds audience is excited to hear what you have to teach us.
It's good to be with you, Kristen. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah. Well, I've known Dr. Hilton for several years, and I'm so appreciative of his work. I just wanted to ask you at the beginning, how did you get into this whole thing about pornography? Probably most neurosurgeons aren't pornography experts as well. So how did that happen?
I'm a father, a grandfather, a person, and I just over a decade ago became convinced that this is the most compelling issue facing our emerging generation today. That is children, adolescents, and emerging adults. And it's simply become, to me, the most critical thing that we can do is educate and arm our young people so that they can understand what they're facing with regard to the programming that is being done to specifically direct their sexuality, to hijack their sexuality, if you will.
Yeah, we want kids to have freedom. We want kids to understand, like you said, the programming that's out there and that's going on, so that they can make choices themselves, make good choices. So let's just start with that part of the brain that is called the reward system or the reward center. Can you tell us what that is and why it's important?
We have a brainstem that is a phylogenetically ancient part of our brain, and it's similar to any other class of lower animals in that it really tells us to just survive, and that brainstem powers the rest of the brain with basic drives. And one of the drive systems that emanates in the brainstem is the dopaminergic system. And it sends wires, if you will, from this, if I'm going to turn my head sideways, this area down in the base of our brain, the brainstem, it sends wires up into this another area kind of in the middle of the brain, which is the brain's reward system. And so in a sense, dopamine powers the brain with desire. Now, if that's the only input we have, we would simply want to seek pleasure, and like an amoeba, simply doesn't really have any other function other than to morph towards food particles, and so things that will help it survive. With us, though, we may, for instance, find that food is pleasurable, and so we want to eat. Well, that's good, except if we don't eat properly or if we eat too much consistently, it can affect our health. We can get heart disease and other diabetes and other things from eating too much or eating the wrong foods. So even though these foods taste good, we have these frontal cortical areas of our brain that are important in judgment. And they also send projections down towards this reward area. So you have the dopaminergic systems coming up from the brainstem to the reward area saying, fine, if it's pleasurable, just do it. And then you have the areas of the cortex, the judgment areas, sending glutaminergic, which is another brain chemical, input down into the reward area. And it's basically telling the reward system to consider that pleasure may be good, but is it really pleasure in the end? For instance, diabetes is not pleasurable. So can
Right.
we weigh that up front and decide maybe we can eat and enjoy food, but not let it harm us, because the pleasure can be painful in the end, actually.
Right.
So that's really the basics of the reward system, and any reward can be essentially overweighted by our brain, where we teach our brain to weight a certain pleasure at the expense of other pleasures. Food is a good example. Some people with alcohol, they may, some can enjoy maybe a glass of wine at night, and others become alcoholics, and it completely controls them. And alcohol is the only thing they think about. So any pleasurable sensation can be overweighted in that way. And sexuality certainly can and is today, probably as much or more than just about any other pleasure by many people.
Okay, and that's all due to the reward system that our brain is constantly like checking in with, and it's driving us to seek pleasure. And our thinking brain is kind of countering that with some breaks, hopefully, to say, you've had 5 chocolate chip cookies, maybe that's enough. So it's kind of this interplay. Why do we need the reward system? Can we live without it?
No, we really can't. The reward system really rewards us for doing things that help us survive both as an individual organism and also as a species. So, for instance, a reward system we're not motivated without a reward system, we're not motivated to eat properly or enough, or to do other things that help us win. The dopamine systems of the brain also incentivize us to win a game, to succeed in other things. So they make us interested in things that help us to survive. So the reward system is essential, but it again can be overweighted for specific pleasures at the expense of other pleasures and other judgments that might that can help us enjoy pleasure more safely.
Okay, right. So we know it's important. We kind of know what it does now. How does porn, using pornography, corrupt or hijack this reward system, or corrupt it in some way? What is it? How does it affect the reward system?
Essentially, it scripts the reward system, and it, instead of sex being an essential drive for us to survive as a species, it becomes, and instead of being a garnish, sex being a garnish that can enhance our lives if used and boundaried properly, then sex can become a master where it dominates our lives and becomes the only thing that people think about. And then it contextualizes sex in porn scripted ways, not sexuality that, say, I'm going to use the example of a married couple that grows together and sexuality enhances their intimacy and their connection. Pornography is essentially sex with strangers or people that maybe they've just met or know superficially. It's hookup sex, basically. And not just that, but most pornographic images today and the most pornographic scenes today, and this is Bridges and many others have studied this, have found that the vast majority of these scenes, up to 80% in some, 88% in some studies, show aggression towards women. So particularly children, these are novel experiences. This is a novel experience of sexuality. So they're seeing anger, domination, male-centric pleasure at the expense of the female, the expense of her desires. And so it's a scripting process, and it's a novel scripting process because they really haven't seen sex before. It's their index experience with sexuality. So it can also become very addictive. And that word is a loaded word to many people, but if the word addiction exists, it certainly exists for sexuality.
Absolutely. So the reward system becomes weighted for sexual experience, sexual arousal. And as kids and adults use pornography, that reward system kind of gains in power, right? Gains in control of the rest of the brain. Is that right?
Well, it becomes preeminent, and also things that may not be tasteful to a person naturally can then become pleasurable, because things, let me word this in another way. Things that are naturally distasteful to a person or even painful can become fused to pleasure through sex and through pornography. So just a brief example, there was a study done a number of years ago with rats in Canada. And essentially simplistic, but it's, I think, pretty illustrative of what we're talking about. So the researchers took a male rat, and put it in a cage. They then put a piece of wood soaked with cadaverine in the cage. Well, cadaverine is a chemical that stinks really bad, to the point where even male rats don't like the smell naturally. It's what makes dead things smell. And so when they put the piece of cadaverine in the cage with the male rat, and the male rat immediately ran away from the cadaverine, which is the natural unconditioned response. Another conditioned meaning something that's scripted or learned. So naturally a rat doesn't like cadaverine, and that's what the male rat did. So the next part of the experiment, they took the cadaverine out, then they put a female rat that was sexually receptive in with the male rat. And the male rat mated with the female, which is what a person would expect. So there was a normal sexual drive there. So the third part of the experiment is they put the female back in the cage, but this time they soaked her fur with cadaverine. Initially, the male rat ran away and tried to avoid this horrible smell, but his sexual drive overcame his distaste for the smell, and he ended up mating with the female rat. And every time a sexually receptive female rat was presented to the male rat, she was soaked with cadaverine. So eventually he became to associate the pleasure of sex with the smell of cadaverine, even though he normally didn't like it. And of course, the last part of the experiment was they put the same male rat in a cage, they put the same piece of cadaverine in, and this time the male rat ran and started trying to eat the piece of wood and to eat the cadaverine. Yeah. So I think it's a pretty powerful illustration of how sexuality can change the template, can change the sexual script. And in fact, the authors of the paper said that for the first time, we have found that an unconditionally aversive stimulus can become conditionally appetitive by pairing with sexual reward. And of course, that happens with people. For instance, a couple of studies have shown that some really horrific and scripting sexual acts which are performed. There was a study out of NYU with Chen Sung's group, and then another one in the British Medical Journal, showing that young women, acts that they particularly did not want to do, they ended up, these acts were coerced upon them. The word coercion was used by young men who knew they didn't want to do it, but they'd been porn scripted. And so their desires overrode the desires of the female to not do the acts. So this is a good example of what I call cadaverine sex, the cadaverine sex of porn.
Yeah. And I've heard from people who, and read, people's accounts that said, I started out with kind of vanilla porn, and then, I went to more extreme. And then I felt such shame at what was arousing me, the violence and even child pornography, child sexual abuse material that was arousing me. And they felt such shame that they were sexually aroused, but it's simply the brain wiring two things together with the power. It's like soldering two things together through the power of sex. That's kind of a welding agent. And that's one of the problems of pornography, because kids get these scripts, and then you get acclimatized, and you get to the point where you're aroused by things that you would have normally really been put off by. So, all right. So that's a really important part of why pornography is so harmful to children, because they don't have previous experience. They come and they watch porn. It rewires their brain so that they are now excited and aroused by things that should be things they would be turning away from, and violence and things that are not good for them and are not good for society at large.